Alright, welcome to Operation End Times. I'm your Jedi warrior for Jesus, Ben Hellstead. This is a continuation of the Vikings series. Last video was Blonde Ambition. This is kind of like a continuation of it, but I'm going to call it To and Fro. Alright, you know, that's a track from Blondie. It's her song Rapture. She also did another song, Heart of Glass. I think it's the Rapture song. There's a video where it's mashed up with the Doors, Break On Through to the Other Side. And I'll tell you what, my friends, you know, it's all reflective. It's all part of the synchronicity of the ages that is unfolding in front of us. You know, some people think there's a rapture. You know, I think there's a transitory event. It's not so much a magic carpet ride, but as the ages change, the waters rise, and there is chaos and destruction. And it is a reflection that keeps happening again and again and again, even though right now we're at the end of one time, the beginning of another, and this particular cycle is going to be a singularity in and of itself, because this cycle has been repeating for, you know, thousands and thousands of years. But thanks to Jesus Christ, you know, he's the rebel, the X factor in this cycle. He changed everything by coming to earth and living the perfect life. Anyway, I'm talking about the Vikings. You know, throughout my whole Operation End Time series, I've always said, hey, you know, what do you value? It's important. You know, do you put value in a big pile of gold here on earth? Or are your eyes looking heavenly towards heavenly treasures? But when it comes to blonde people and Vikings, and they're kind of joined together, because when you think of a Viking, you see a guy that looks kind of like me. Like if you look at the Minnesota Vikings football team, their logo is a helmet with the horns coming out of it, with a blue-eyed, blonde-haired, bearded Viking. You know, Thor in the comic books, blonde hair, you know. But what we find is when we look at both blonde people and Vikings, the actual history and the perception of the world of these people, they stick out like a sore thumb. You know, blonde people are only 2% of the people on Earth. And it is a genetic mutation caused by a recessive gene, where the gene is shut off by an extra dose of estrogen, and therefore blue eyes and blonde hair manifest forth. I have put forth the premise that it's a genetic DNA marker, and the creation of woman from the womb of man, Eve, may have been a step up in the evolutionary chain, that a womankind was better than mankind because they were gentler, more compassionate, more nurturing, whereas mankind, driven by the male ego, had proven over and over and over again that it only manifested darkness, that only evil was in the hearts and minds of men, and that they kept rising up in their own pride and ego and becoming a ruler, or what I call a crueler. He who is the cruelest rules. All of which is not part of the kingdom of God. Now, God has had some hand-selected rulers, both men and women, and when they became rulers, if they had wisdom, you know, they walked the humble path even as a ruler, and they showed mercy and compassion and fairness. So anyway, this is just like a huge topic. There's no way you can get your hands around it in one video, but we're just going to keep on mulching forward. You know, if you have questions, if I say anything and you're like, hey, where did that come from? You know, just ask it again and I'll try and give you where I found it in my research. But, you know, blonde people, you know, blondes have more fun. Throughout history, blondes have stood out. If you look at history, it looks like a lot of blondes were in position of power, being rulers and kings. They found these graves in China where the kings and queens had blonde hair. I showed you the maps yesterday. This is kind of like the Mediterranean area in Israel over here, and how Mount Hermon and Damascus and Beirut are north of Jerusalem. That whole coastline, that where the Mediterranean makes that little curve, that whole coastline was seafaring people. That the third son of Cain, Irad, his name means fleet, like a fleet of boats. The Phoenicians, one of the greatest maritime societies, came out of Damascus and Beirut. To the south was the land of Manasseh, those who forget, trapped in the carnal 3D world along a linear line. Below them was the tribe of Dan, the Danes, the Danish. And the land of Canaan was right there in the land of Manasseh. Canaan was the son of Ham, the son of Noah. Noah, who came down off the mountain where everybody was afraid of him. Why? Because of his hair color. He was described as having light hair and brilliant eyes. We talked about Joshua crossing the river, another reflection of the same water event, that when he got to the promised land, he had to fight the 5 kings that were descendants of the Nephilim. But there were 2 tribes that were just south of Mount Hermon, which were tribes with women's names that he let stay there, which look an awful lot like they were the daughters of men that the sons of God found were fair. Could they have been blonde-haired people? And also, the city of Dan is right up there north, even though the land of Dan is south of the land of Manasseh and on the ocean in that little curved part of the Mediterranean. What we see is when we look at blonde-haired people, there seems to be, a trail of where the blondness came down on Mount Hermon and then permeated southward, eastward, and westward, all directions, like it was a virus on the planet Earth. Some might say to destroy the earth, but I would say to cure and heal the earth. Everything has 2 perceptions. Money is not evil nor good. It's what you do with it that determines, the love of money is evil. But if you're giving away $5 to somebody on the street that's hungry, that's a good thing. But these blonde-haired people came down off of Mount Hermon. Noah came down off of Mount Ararat. We showed on the patriarchal lineage how there's this hiddenness of the women and the wives, the queen bees. If you look at pictures of Adam and Eve, a lot of times pictures of Eve especially are blonde or red or strawberry blonde hair. So maybe Eve was pulled out of the womb of man, but she was also genetically modified to where she was blonde. There had not been any blonde people on Earth, or they had gone extinct. Now, you may think that sounds crazy, but even now, blondness hasn't been around that much, but there's already books predicting that blondness will be extinct by the year 2222, somewhere around there. So could it have gone extinct in the past? Does it even matter if there are blonde people on Earth? And I'm not trying to say blonde people are better or are chosen. Those are all words that other people say when their asses are chapped. I'm just saying, I'm looking at the reality of the planet. I didn't choose to be born the way I was. I just came out of the womb. Here I am, But I want my eyes to be open. And it sure seems like the planet genetically is set up to have darker skinned people with brown or black hair, and the blondness is an abnormality, something that isn't quite natural. And what we see is there's a progression northward from Jerusalem northward, or it could have been southward. In other words, if the blondness came down on Mount Hermon, it came southward towards Israel, down into Egypt. It went eastward towards India, towards China, and it went westward to and fro from the people that were living along the coast, the Phoenicians, the tribe of Dan, the Canaanites, which were the sons of Ham, who got cursed. And right in that area is the tribe of the Saraphem, the fiery serpents. And it was the religion, the cult of the dragon and of the serpent that became the Vikings' boats with the dragon heads. But did the Vikings actually worship the serpent, It's just like Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church, there are good things about it, but then there's utterly dark and evil things about the Catholic Church, or about any church. Mormons, Presbyterians, Baptists, Lutherans, whatever. It's like a coin. There's always 2 sides, good and bad. So some people always want to paint the Vikings. They were worshiping the serpent, they were a blood cult, they were raping, pillaging, and plundering. But if you actually do any research into the Vikings or into blonde people, you find the exact opposite. So principalities in high places are trying to paint a dark coat over blonde-haired people. Why is that? Blonde-haired people have been mixing with all other races, and now blondness is throughout society. Blondie, Marilyn Monroe, Madonna, and on and on and on and on and on it goes, where, a lot of brunettes have blonde ambition. Why is that, But what we find is the Saraphem that were right down in that area with the Danites. Let's just say the boats set off across the Mediterranean, headed towards islands like Cyprus and Crete, eventually to Greece, to Italy, to Spain, around the Horn, to Ireland and England, and then possibly up into the Scandinavian countries. But I believe there was also a land route which was going towards the Black Sea. The Black Sea represents dark, arcane knowledge. So guess what? The blonde race probably got distorted one way or the other as they traveled north. And their mythology, their what they viewed as the gods in reality, even though it has a absolutely mind-blowing parallel to Christianity and Jesus, Thor being Jesus, it's also got distortions. But somehow they traveled north and settled at the Baltic Sea, Baltic, and maybe the Vikings' culture and religion at this point was distorted like all other religions and cultures are, because there's only one truth, and that's God's truth, and the dividing up of lands, the dividing up of religions, the dividing up of people by languages is a path downward, a shadow path. But what you will find is the Vikings, were the people, the Philistines, means people who wander to and fro. Satan in Job, when he came to God, and God said, "Where you been?" He said, "I've been wandering to and fro." And Cain, when he left the land of, left the garden, he went to the land of Nod, but he was a vagabond wandering to and fro. So I will tell you what, there's both positive and negative with wandering to and fro. If you're walking with God and you're going where He's blowing the wind in your sails, then if you're going to and fro, you're going with the power and the breath of God in your sails. But if you're just stumbling and bumbling around in the shadows, exploring for your own gain, like going to a foreign land and applying the whip, or the sword and taking riches, that's part of that distortion in the shadow path. And that's what happened a lot of times. Via the church, like the conquistadors who were Spanish Catholics that came to the Aztecs and killed them all and took their gold. Now the Vikings, when they came, I'll tell you, if you just study their history, they really didn't pillage and plunder as much as you think. I went to the Wikipedia page on Vikings, and you find verbiage like this, under medieval perceptions of the Vikings, it says, the Viking Age began dramatically in 1793, and it was about 300 years. Surprise, surprise, like the ark was 300 cubits long, so that's the fullness of the Vikings. But it says the reason why people viewed them as being, pillaging and plundering and being these raging lunatics is because they attacked some churches, and so the church painted them as pagans and devil worshippers. But if you actually look at their culture, they were more into trading, establishing trade routes, relationships with people. And I read you the Viking laws, which sound pretty good, like level-headed, calm people. What we know is blonde people are friendly as can be. Norway, and Denmark and those countries up there pretty much stayed out of the wars. There's the Nobel Peace Prize, which comes out of Norway. Norway is one of the friendliest countries you can visit. And yet somehow, for this 300-year period, they just went berserk and wanted to kill everybody. But, is that the truth? Now, there are stories of Odin going down on into Mexico. They have Odin Day or Wooden Day or Voltan Day, all being the same person. They said Odin even went to Babylon, so who is this Odin? Was he Cain? Was he, the Mexican people say he claimed to be the grandson of Noah, which would mean he was Canaan or Ham, But once again, we have a person traveling all over the place, the blondness traveling, and we have this serpent culture all over the globe. And there is a connection, my friends. I don't want to run over here, so I'm going to end this video. This is To and Fro Part 1. Operation End Times, the Vikings. I'm going to try and get another video right on up. All right, hey, God bless you all for listening to this.